King. It was recorded earlier today in the blue drawing room here at Buckingham Palace. And the people you can see outside are in mourning for the only monarch that most of them have ever known. And even though at 96 years old, this moment was inevitable, many here still in shock because it's hard to imagine the country without her. She was, for Britain, reliable, steadfast, and committed. The Queen was a constant presence in a changing world. Well, now, a new age under a new king. In his speech today, King Charles will pay tribute to the Queen, his mother, and pledge his duty as the new monarch. We actually saw King Charles and Camilla, the new Queen consort, here at Buckingham Palace a few hours ago to chants of "God Save the King." Imagine the first time that has been uttered in more than 70 years. There you can hear it. The new king shook hands with some of the thousands of people outside mourning the death of Queen Elizabeth. There was even a moment when one woman embraced him for a kiss. Churches and public buildings around Britain rang their bells at noon local time, followed an hour later by a 96-gun salute here in London, one round for each year of the Queen's life. King Charles has just met with Britain's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who was formally appointed by the Queen only 3 days ago. Duty in many ways in the face of mourning. I want to bring in CBS News royal contributor Julian Payne. He joins me here in London, and he was the former communications director for the Prince of Wales. Now, King Charles III. That's quite a heady moment even to say it, isn't it? I'm sure it's
quite a change.
Yes, for someone who worked so closely with him. And I know you've spoken with him in the past about what this moment would mean. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Unlike his mother, or indeed his grandfather, this is a moment that he always knew was coming to him. Of course, history had to change for Queen Elizabeth to become our sovereign. In his case, he's always known this was coming. And in that regard, he's had a long time to think about what this moment will mean, how he'll want to take on this role as sovereign, as King Charles III, as he now is. And I think he's always had in his mind what these first few days will need to do. My sense is it will be in his mind reassurance, stability, continuity. All these things will be at the forefront of his mind. And of course, don't forget, this is all happening at the same time as he's dealing with the very real emotional challenge of having lost his own mother. So I have no doubt he's got a very clear sense of how the next few days will go, but I think there'll be a battle there as well for him emotionally. Yeah,
something no one is ever prepared for is the loss of a parent and a family member, and he's got to, of course, address the world. What do you think he'll want to signal about the monarchy and the future of the monarchy in this address?
Well, let's be absolutely clear. These are historic words. This is the first time we have heard a new monarch speak in this country for more than 70 years. I have absolutely no doubt he's aware of the sort of weight of history sitting there. I am sure he will want to talk about his mother. He'll want to venerate her memory. And I think he'll also want to set out a little bit about how he will want to take things forward. Those two things will, I think, be the main things that we'll hear from him very shortly.
And then after this speech to the nation, to the world, what happens next?
Well, you'll see over the next 10 days, two things are happening, really. We are looking at the end of the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, and that story as she is ultimately buried. And at the same time, you see the new reign beginning. So you will see the new sovereign will begin to travel around the UK. You will see him talking to people, meeting people. And very, very quickly, you're going to start to get a sense of this new reign and how it's going to look and feel.
Mm-hmm. Will he continue? Oh, and we're getting the word that the speech is coming just shortly now. Our understanding is it's maybe under about 10 minutes long. Let's listen in now, as many people are sitting down to hear him for the first time as king.
I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow. Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen, my beloved mother, was an inspiration, an example to me and to all my family. And we owe her the most heartfelt debt any family could owe to their mother, for her love, affection, guidance, understanding, and example. Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to you all today. Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, we also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom, in all the countries where the Queen was head of state, in the Commonwealth and across the world, a deep sense of gratitude for the more than 70 years in which my mother, as Queen, served the people of so many nations. In 1947, on her 21st birthday, she pledged in a broadcast from Cape Town to the Commonwealth to devote her life, whether it be short or long, to the service of her peoples. That was more than a promise. It was a profound personal commitment which defined her whole life. She made sacrifices for duty. Her dedication and devotion as sovereign never wavered through times of change and progress, through times of joy and celebration, and through times of sadness and loss. In her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress, which makes us great as nations. The affection, admiration, and respect she inspired became the hallmark of her reign. And as every member of my family can testify, she combined these qualities with warmth, humor, and an unerring ability always to see the best in people. I pay tribute to my mother's memory, and I honor her life of service. I know that her death brings great sadness to so many of you, and I share that sense of loss beyond measure with you all. When the Queen came to the throne, Britain and the world were still coping with the privations and aftermath of the Second World War, and still living by the conventions of earlier times. In the course of the last 70 years, we have seen our society become one of many cultures and many faiths. The institutions of the state have changed in turn. But through all changes and challenges, our nation and the wider family of realms, of whose talents, traditions, and achievements I am so inexpressibly proud, have prospered and flourished. Our values have remained and must remain constant. The role and the duties of monarchy also remain, as does the sovereign's particular relationship and responsibility towards the Church of England, the church in which my own faith is so deeply rooted. In that faith and the values it inspires, I have been brought up to cherish a sense of duty to others and to hold in the greatest respect the precious traditions, freedoms, and responsibilities of our unique history and our system of parliamentary government. As the Queen herself did with such unswerving devotion, I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation. And wherever you may live in the United Kingdom, or in the realms and territories across the world, and whatever may be your background or beliefs, I shall endeavor to serve you with loyalty, respect, and love as I have throughout my life. My life will, of course, change as I take up my new responsibilities. It will no longer be possible for me to give so much of my time and energies to the charities and issues for which I care so deeply. But I know this important work will go on in the trusted hands of others. This is also a time of change for my family. I count on the loving help of my darling wife, Camilla. In recognition of her own loyal public service since our marriage 17 years ago, she becomes my Queen Consort. I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely so much. As my heir, William now assumes the Scottish titles which have meant so much to me. He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall, which I have undertaken for more than 5 decades. Today, I am proud to create him Prince of Wales, Tywysog Cymru, the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty. With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to the centre ground, where vital help can be given. I want also to express my love for Harry and Meghan as they continue to build their lives overseas. In a little over a week's time, we will come together as a nation, as a Commonwealth, and indeed a global community, to lay my beloved mother to rest. In our sorrow, let us remember and draw strength from the light of her example. On behalf of all my family, I can only offer the most sincere and heartfelt thanks for your condolences and support. They mean more to me than I can ever possibly express. And to my darling Mama, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you. Thank you for your love and devotion to our family and to the family of nations you have served so diligently all these years. May flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
And there it is, the world hears for the first time from King Charles III talking about his profound sadness at the loss of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. He talked about her devotion, that her devotion to her country never wavered, in his words. And then he also talked about his own role. He talked about the people of the Commonwealth and that he would do his best to serve them. And then he talked a little bit about what his own role may be. I want to bring in Julian, who remains here with us because you worked so closely with then Prince Charles. First, he talked about the charities. He is well known for his involvement in charities, including on the issue of climate change. What did you make of that particular reference there?
Well, look, I think that was an extraordinary speech. There was a lot in there. If we go into that point in particular, he's sending messages in this speech. So one of the most important things he's saying is, my role is changing. So the work that I do, raising money, the philanthropic work I do, I will now have to do less of. There are other people now, and he referenced his son, the Duke of Cambridge, now Prince of Wales, who will take on some of that work. So he's saying very clearly, I'm stepping away from this work and I will now be focusing on the role of sovereign. He also talked, of course, about the role of sovereign and the constitutional boundaries. So he was, again, making it absolutely clear he knows there are restrictions that have to be respected when you are sovereign. You can be a campaigning prince as Prince of Wales, but when you become king, the time is there for you then to sort of think about how you can speak out on things or the way you can do it, because that role is different. And I think that's really important that we heard that there today.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine most people in this country, because it's just after 6 o'clock before dinner time, are all sitting in their living rooms and have watched this.
Oh, I mean, I think there was 30+ million people watching the news last night. I've absolutely no doubt that that will have happened again. I mean, this is history happening in this country this evening. I've absolutely no doubt. And how nice that you heard there the first things that the new king speak about was his love for his mother. And then towards the end, we heard him talk about his love for his mother and his father. And of course, dotted through that were references to family throughout. Mm-hmm. I was really interested to see how careful he was to speak of not just the Duke of Cambridge, now Prince of Wales, but also Harry and Meghan, and to speak of his love for them as they build their new life in America. So I think it was really important to him that he talked about all of those points in this historic address.
Julian Payne, stand by. I want to bring in Mark Phillips, who has covered the royal family for years. And Mark, I know that you, of course, have followed now King Charles throughout many decades now. What did you make of his remarks?
Well, I thought it was an extremely comprehensive and effective speech. It struck all the notes that you would expect it to. It paid tribute to his mother in very heartfelt terms. It talked about his dedication to carry on the same sort of dedication to duty that she had exhibited through her 7-decade reign. It talked about what would have to change in terms of the housekeeping of royalty, so that formerly Prince William now becomes Prince of Wales, which of course is the traditional title of the heir to the throne in this country. But there were two, I think, very personal elements to the speech that he really didn't have to do, but clearly chose to do, and chose to do in very strong language. One was the dedication to the Queen Consort Camilla and the reliance that he's had on her for the period that they have been together, and inspired him to continue in the role as he goes forward. The reference to William and Catherine, as Kate, as she's known to us, was also one that he has to make because, of course, William is now the heir to the throne, and there are certain prescriptions, formal prescriptions. The reference to Harry and Meghan, I think, can be interpreted as a reaching out. There has been a lot of talk about the distance that has grown between Harry and the rest of the family, a lot of suggestion as to what might happen when the Queen passed in that relationship. This, to me, seems like a reaching out to Harry and Meghan, while still recognizing that their life is one now being lived in California across the water. I think the expressed he used was to express the love to Harry and Meghan as they continue their life overseas. That isn't something that he had to do, and it's something that'll certainly make headlines.
No doubt, indeed. And Mark, I understand that we're learning more about how the Queen spent her final weekend.
Well, we've learned in one report about the last few days that she spent at Balmoral, in which several people have reported that she seemed very with it, chirpy. It was one description that we heard, but it also turns out that the local vicar, the local cleric who was brought in to deliver a sermon at the Royal Chapel over the weekend, had a couple of meals with the Queen then in the palace, and he talked about, of course, she's a woman known for having had great faith, her lack of any fear, her looking forward to, but her acceptance of the hereafter with mentioning, of course, that there was as imminent as it proved to be, but that she was very much at peace with the idea of being at Balmoral, which was her favorite place, and that whatever would happen, and she was entirely okay with that.
Yes, and that devotion to duty that King Charles talked about was evidenced in her working to the very end, welcoming, of course, the new Prime Minister. And then I thought standing there in her tartan skirt with her cane and her sweater in front of the fire and smiling broadly at the work that she does. We should also mention that the first public memorial for the Queen will take place in Scotland, where her long life ended. And Elizabeth Palmer is outside Holyrood House in Edinburgh, where the Queen's coffin will be brought over the weekend. And Liz, walk us through the schedule for the coming days.
Well, it's going to be a whole series of events, a lot of very solemn pageantry. At the moment, the Queen's body is still at Balmoral, but it's expected shortly, perhaps even tomorrow, to be driven in a procession roughly 100 miles from that country estate that she loved so much here to the Scottish capital and indeed to the royal residence behind me, which is called Holyrood House. There have been people coming to lay flowers all day. They're behind me, probably half a yard deep now, stretching all the way along the wall. Once she has rested in Holyrood House, there will be a procession to the great Gothic cathedral here in Edinburgh, St. Giles's, and a special service. During that service, there'll be something called the Vigil of the Princes. It's where the children of the royal family stand guard in a ceremonial sense over the coffin. In the past, it's just been the male members of the royal family, but perhaps this time Princess Anne will be included in that group. After that, the Queen's body will be flown to London, and that is going to be a multi-day lying in state in Westminster Hall, which is in the heart of the Houses of Parliament. And the palace says they're expecting hundreds of thousands of people to want to file past and pay their respects. So the lineups are going to be miles long, probably, and that will take place next week. After that's over, and it will last several days, 4 probably, then the Queen's body will be taken to Westminster Abbey for the grand state funeral, the royal funeral, and then finally she'll be laid to rest in Windsor next to her husband, Prince Philip, who died last year.
Elizabeth, you did that schedule beautifully and succinctly, and gave everyone a wonderful preview of what's ahead. I mean, and as you can see, I mean, behind me here at Buckingham Palace, there are thousands and thousands of people here, and they were here late last night in the pouring rain as everyone wants to pay tribute to the Queen and get a sense of, as in many of these cases, be around other people as they are mourning and marking this particular moment. I want to bring in Roxana Saberi because she is outside Windsor Castle and has been speaking with people there. Good evening, Roxana.
Good evening, Nora. A steady stream of people has been coming by here as well outside Windsor Castle, where the Queen spent so many of her childhood years as well as her more recent adult years. Some people have been taking photos, videos, or just standing in quiet reflection. But it's on the other side of the castle where people have been directed to lay flowers, and there are thousands of bouquets there as well as several cards that have been left behind. Some people have been seen hugging. We also saw some people crying. And what strikes me as really interesting, Nora, is that the crowd here is diverse. I spoke to some immigrants who said they didn't grow up with a monarch, but they are still in mourning. I spoke to an 85-year-old woman who lives nearby who fondly remembers driving to London in 1947 to wave at the Queen on her wedding day. And there was a 9-year-old boy who said he asked his mother to bring him here so that he could lay flowers. You know, King Charles just referred to the admiration and respect that his mother inspired, and some of the cards that we saw outside on the other side of the castle reflected that inspiration. One card said, "Thank you for your service. You were the glue that held us together. We are diminished without your loving and kind influence. Rest in peace, your Your Majesty. Nora?
Roxana Saberi outside Windsor Castle, and Julian Payne is with us. And for many Americans who are watching this, of course, Windsor Castle has been around for a very long time, but they most recently know is where Harry and Meghan got married.
That's right.
Yes.
That's absolutely right. A very special day, and it's often said that when the British royal family does pageantry, it really is a spectacle, and that was an incredibly special day, a beautiful blue sky day, and a day of celebration really for everybody in the UK and of course around the world.
And what did you make of King Charles? Mark Phillips called it an outreach, but it was also just a mention of both of his children. You could be viewed it as just as simply as that, mentioning his children and where they were in life.
I think what's interesting about this is there are many people that try and put words into the mouth of the family, and actually the family very rarely talk about themselves. So you haven't seen the king speak about his son very often because he tends not to talk about his family. So what we've seen is a natural expression of love for both of his children, and I think that is perfectly natural and to be expected. But I think it's important that when he's making this historic address that he does speak about his love for his sons, his love for his wife, and of course his love for his mother and father as well. It felt very natural to me, I have to say, but as your colleague said, I've no doubt that lots of people are going to be speculating furiously about that for days to come.
We talked about people at home in their living rooms watching, and of course members of Parliament suspended their eulogies to watch this, and we are told that many of them could be seen wiping away tears during the remarks. This is a country in mourning.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that talk here at the moment about being overwhelmed with sense of emotion just out of nowhere, and these moments, and you see these crowds here, but in every town and village around the country, people will have their own memories of the Queen. They'll have their own thoughts about the future, and it is an emotional time for the country. You can absolutely feel it.
For you too?
Absolutely. I feel the same as everybody else. It's been an emotional time. But you know, I also have a real sense of hope, and listening to the new King's words there, I feel very optimistic, actually, that as we move forward, we have a new sovereign who is absolutely clear in what he is here to do. The duty and service will continue, and I feel very reassured by that.
Julian, thank you for joining us on this very historic moment. We appreciate it. Let's now take a look at a public memorial service that is taking place at St. Paul's Cathedral, where some 2,000 people, including Prime Minister Liz Truss, is attending in remembrance for the Queen. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and we will have much more tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell in London.
And we have just heard King Charles III's first public comments since the death of his mother.
The new king opened his remarks expressing profound sorrow for the loss of the Queen, and he paid tribute to her devotion for serving the United Kingdom in times of joy and in times of sadness. Let's bring in CBS News royal contributor Amanda Foreman and Lana Zak, who is in London outside Buckingham Palace. Good to have you both. Lana, let me begin with you. What has the reaction been like there in London?
It's been very positive. You know, it's interesting. I had mentioned to you before the outpouring of love that we've seen for the Queen, including all those flowers. One of the cards that I had snapped a picture of earlier in the day said thank you to the Queen for being our constant. And we just heard King Charles speak in that same language, talking about our values have remained and must remain constant. He also, I think, in so many ways hearkened to what folks here have told me that they loved about the Queen. In fact, he says that he was brought up to cherish a sense of duty to others. We heard over and over again how he made that parallel between what I have heard from so many people here about what they loved about Queen Elizabeth to what he hopes to bring to the monarchy.
And Amanda, I want to bring you in and ask you a little bit about your reaction to these remarks. A lot of people were hoping that he would walk this fine line between both being a new king, but also he's a son who is mourning the loss of his mother. And I thought he really struck that chord very well.
Yes, he really did, Nancy. He like the Queen had done during her broadcasts, used the word I a lot. I feel this, and I know you share this with me. And that was a signature way of talking that the royal family and the Queen in particular really mastered. And he did the same thing. So I think he, to use an American phrase, hit it out of the ballpark in this particular speech. And people will see that he's offering continuity, which is very important. This was not the speech could have been one that his mother could have given at any other time, but it was also very necessary because people are mourning, and he needed to show that he owned that grief with them.
And Lana, we're seeing now what took place earlier today, that moment that I know you saw outside Buckingham Palace, which was a bit unexpected, where King Charles III actually got out and began shaking the hands of and receiving the embraces of those mourners who had gathered there. Describe for us what that was like for people who, may not have seen this video before and may not realize, this was not something that was planned.
Right, we expected him to come to Buckingham Palace. We knew he was on his way back to London, but it was still a surprise, certainly to the public who had gathered there, not expecting to have an audience with the king. The moment that his vehicle pulled up and he got out of the car and you could see him being embraced by the public, there was audible cheers. People started all moving en masse to his location. And it was really a very powerful moment because not only did the sun burst forth, which we, as you can see, haven't had much of today, but how approachable he was. Remember, this is a time when the Queen just a little bit ago had spoken about her belief that one day we would be with friends again, we would greet each other again. Because of the pandemic, people had been isolated. She certainly had been isolated. And here was King Charles, his first time as king there at Buckingham Palace, embracing and being embraced by his public, even receiving kisses on his hands and one on his cheek as well.
All right, apologies. We were being told that apparently the British Prime Minister just wrapped up some remarks at St. Paul's Cathedral just a moment ago. We know there are some 2,000 people gathered there. But Amanda, let me ask you a bit about, there's a bit of that service just a short time ago. This notion of connecting with the British people in a way that there are such high expectations for, given how beloved the Queen was. Talk to us about what you heard in the King's remarks that seemed to send a very clear signal about the direction he plans to take the monarchy. I heard him talk about the British in a different way, talking about many cultures and a people of many faiths. What did you hear in that speech?
Yes, I heard that too, that he was determined to lay out exactly what is the monarchy for, that this will have been the unspoken question that he knows would have been asked, new king, new era, what does the monarchy do and why do we have one? And so he laid it out. First of all, he showed that the monarchy is there to rise above politics, to be a figurehead, to be a focus in times of joy, in times of sadness, and to be completely apolitical and non-partisan, number one. And number two, he said that the role of Prince William and Princess Wales is to help the marginalized, to bring the focus to those who are less privileged, bring it into the center, and to help them. So now we know what the monarchy is for.
It's been an especially important note to mention, too, because it has not been smooth sailing for the monarchy and the royal family these past few years, especially. And there's been a lot of questions about what is the future of the royal family in the UK and the world. And so it seemed like he was addressing parts of that conversation right there, too.
Which is an extremely important conversation. Britain's role in the world has been sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad. And it has a colonial past, an imperial past, that it has to answer to. And while it can be difficult politically for governments to do that, the monarchy, and the Queen in particular, was able to address it head on. And she began that conversation in 2011 when she went to Ireland and addressed that difficult past. And it completely changed relations with that country. And we will now see more of that kind of conversation with the rest of the Commonwealth.
Lana, what is the scene like now where you are? I know, obviously, nightfall is approaching quickly, but talk to me a little bit about the kinds of sentiments you're seeing expressed in, written form, in the flowers, I imagine, that are being left there, and what it is that people are saying at this moment.
Well, and Elaine, we've been moving throughout the day to all different parts of London to have the opportunity to speak with different people, not just the folks who had gathered outside of Buckingham Palace, who obviously felt a kinship with the Queen, but even in speaking with people in various parts of London that aren't necessarily royal watchers, that they feel so moved by the Queen's passing, even if they were not supporters of the royal family necessarily, that they felt like there was something very special about this moment. The other thing that I just wanted to say that was so interesting too about his speech was in talking about the concept of family, the royal family. We heard the King talk about his mother in affectionate terms that might be unusual and certainly wouldn't have been what you would have heard from a king in previous iterations. His darling mama, talking about his late papa, and speaking about his own wife, the Queen Consort, and what a support she would be and has been to him, talking about his sons and how he was expressing, in some ways people are already starting to talk about what sounded like an outreach, an active outreach, hand extended to his younger son, Prince Harry. And all of that concept of family and bringing people here in London, throughout the Commonwealth, and really throughout the world, into what felt like a very intimate feeling of family that perhaps we were all part of, as opposed to it being more separate.
And on that note, in bringing up Prince Harry and Meghan, but he also brought up, Amanda, now the new Prince of Wales and the new Princess of Wales, the first time that title has been given and bestowed in a few decades, or a couple decades now.
And not to be too frivolous about it, it is kind of exciting to have a new Princess of Wales. It's been 25 years, and to have one who's so beautiful, looks so glamorous, wears such great dresses, it just brings a bit of sparkle into our lives, and it's kind of fun.
And it's kind of fun, but as we were talking about off camera, Amanda, also purposeful as well. To the King's mission now of, as he talked about, having to turn more of his focus, away from those charitable responsibilities, and of course now to the duties of being king, that he now sort of expects, right? The prince and princess to take up those responsibilities and to bring in the marginalized and to ensure that the focus remains. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes, so we've already seen in the last 2 or 3 years Prince William, the Prince of Wales and Princess of Wales taking up some of those responsibilities already, particularly in climate change, endangered animals, mental health in particular. And so we will see more of that. That is their role. They have shown themselves more than adequate to take it up. So I think that the British can feel confident that isn't going to change. It's only going to be more so.
Sparkle and substance.
Yeah.
Amanda Foreman, thank you very much for joining us today, and Lana Zach, to you as well. And we will take a quick break and be right back.
Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
People around the globe are mourning the passing of Queen Elizabeth II.
The hashtag Queen Elizabeth actually became the #1 worldwide trend on Twitter shortly after her death on Thursday. Other keywords connected to the longest reigning British monarch were also trending on social media, and those included Charles, royal family, and Lizzie.
Joining us now is Erin Vanderhoof. She's a staff writer for Vanity Fair. She's also the co-host of Vanity Fair's Dynasty podcast, which focuses on the royal family. Erin, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Nancy and Elaine.
So I want to ask about the connection that this queen had, not just with the British people, but particularly here with Americans. You know, people outside the UK all around the globe are talking about the Queen's death and sending their tributes and condolences, but particularly so here. Why do you think that is, that people in the United States have been so transfixed with the Queen?
Well, I think it's really important to remember that the Queen was reigning over Britain when Anglophone media took over the world and when Britain became such a huge source of pop culture. And we just associate her with, you know, the rock and roll. We associate her with the British, you know, all of the British music that came around, British movies. And she played into it, definitely. She would go to concerts every year. You know, her last big concert was in 2012, and she did get to see One Direction. And I think that it's that combination of that remove and her iconicness. You know, when you think Queen, it's just a short woman with that haircut. And the fact that people personally liked her, even in England where people don't, you know, they might be Republicans, they might believe that there shouldn't be a monarchy. I've heard so many people say, but I really liked her as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was such an institution after so many decades. So many people have just known her as a force in their lives, wherever they are in the world. What are some of the reactions that you've been hearing about from people, not only in the UK, but around the world?
I think pretty much everybody who ever had an interaction with her is telling the story of it. You know, it was her style that she really wanted people to feel special when she was in their presence, but she did it in a kind of funny way where she would always make a little comment, a little wry remark, and so everybody's got a great little story about the Queen. I think one of the things you really see is that people who did award her, you know, she gave, or who got awards from her, rather, you know, who got knighthoods, who got damehoods, they have been coming out and just saying, you know, everything that I've done for Britain, I did, you know, partially because the Queen was around in my childhood. I did partially because, you know, the nation that she built. you also, get to see some really great fun. There have been a lot of fun tributes. You got, Paris Hilton chimed in, and I think that she's just the most famous woman in the world, and I think everybody has a sort of tangential connection. You've seen even the corporations get involved.
Right, and it's interesting to see across the spectrum, right, that connection that this queen had. So you talk about her style, you talk about her warmth and this connection she had. Let's talk about King Charles III. What do you think we can expect there? Because as Lana said a moment ago, he's got some big shoes to fill.
Yeah, I'm sure nobody envies him taking on a job like that right now. But for the last couple of years, the handover has been going on. You've seen Charles step up more and more for his mother, and you've seen him chart a path on the issues he wants to be the head of. The two things that I know that from my reporting, that Charles is really going to try to take the lead on insofar as he can. So now that he's the king, he's going to have to really tamp down his own opinions. But he wants people of all faiths in Britain to know that he can represent them. He has a really, really close connection with the Muslim and the Sikh communities in Britain. And he really wants to be a person who can help Britain find a way forward on race. Last fall, he went to Barbados. And one of the things that he was really, really clear about was, it used to be you could never imagine the heir to the throne just speaking openly about slavery. And he was able to do that. And there are certain things that we won't be able to hear him say anymore, but he's already made it clear enough that what direction he wants things to go in. And we are going to see him less on the pomp and circumstance and a lot more on how can we, make the country move forward.
And also, even when you talk about a different approach to things, it's been reported that he also has advocated for a more streamlined monarchy in terms of the line of succession. But I do want to bring up Prince Harry and Meghan because their children, if things follow as they should not be able, other children should not be able to use those royal titles. So can you explain how that happened? There was a little bit of controversy about this just to even begin with.
Well, so, the controversy began back in March of 2021 when there was a little bit of a debate. The reporters had been told from the palace that Meghan and Harry didn't want their kids to have titles, and they wanted their kids to have a more normal life. Meghan and Harry made it seem like that might not be the case, and the thing that everybody came back to was a 1917 law that says all grandchildren can have the title. But the thing about this 1917 law is that it was signed into place by the King George V at the time, and Charles is king now. He can do what he wants. For decades, we're talking, since Harry and William were children, Charles always saw the family being smaller and less cost to the taxpayer. That was always really important to him.
Less people on the balcony.
Yeah, fewer people on the balcony, exactly. But, he can't see the future, and he didn't know that his son was going to be a little bit more rebellious and maybe he was going to want to move to the U.S. So he's had to reassess some of those plans. That really means keeping his sister, Princess Anne, who's like the hardest working royal, and Prince Edward and his wife Sophie, both of whom are just so passionate about their charitable causes. That wasn't in the plan so far. And when it comes to Meghan and Harry, I think everybody feels like it's pretty clear that they've made a life for themselves in California. But, I think that the titles are one of those things where, Charles may have to make a reassessment, but all the signs point to, the royal separation is final.
And we will see a lot of pieces that have yet to fall on all of this.
Yeah. Oh, yes, so many pieces.
Erin Vanderhoof, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Erin.
And shortly after the Queen's passing was announced yesterday, President Biden ordered all U.S. flags to fly at half-staff.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi also ordered flags to be lowered at the Capitol building. Tributes have been pouring in from lawmakers for the longest ruling monarch in Great Britain's history.
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now with more. Scott, good to see you. What else are officials in Washington planning in honor of the Queen?
Well, first of all, we expect some formal legislation in the U.S. Congress, which is somewhat customary when somebody of this magnitude passes away. Perhaps Tuesday, perhaps Wednesday, a formal resolution of bereavement to honor Queen Elizabeth's life and her reign. That's likely to happen midweek. It will also be accompanied by any number of formal floor speeches in the U.S. House and other events in and around the Capitol. We also expect, as the flags fly at half-staff outside the Capitol, that delegations of members of Congress are planning to attend any proceedings, any events in Great Britain that honor the former Queen. What's more, even if there's not a formal congressional delegation, there'll be some members of Congress who want to attend this on their own dime, on their own time. At the British Embassy here in Washington, in Northwest Washington, D.C., they've opened the doors for a condolence book signing for members of the public to go in there, put their names in the book, share their condolences with the royal family, and, of course, the president planning some type of honor for the former queen, likely a visit to Great Britain during proceedings there later this month.
Well, Scott, we have heard from dozens of lawmakers so far who have spoken out about the Queen. What has stood out to you the most?
Yeah, the symmetry in what everybody's saying. At a moment when the politically toxic environment has everybody arguing over everything, there's a unanimity in the tributes being paid to Queen Elizabeth by Republicans, by Democrats, by longtime members of Congress, longtime government leaders, and those who've just arrived. Let's listen to the Senate Republican and Democratic leaders on the Senate floor earlier yesterday.
She's been a historic friend of the United States. The decades of her reign have seen a profound deepening of the special relationship between our two countries that has literally changed the world.
Her reign saw the dawn of the atomic age, the age of the internet, the fall of the Soviet Union, an unprecedented global pandemic. She didn't just witness the great turns of history, she helped shape them over the 7 decades of her reign.
One thing that stood out is, again, you have Republicans and Democrats saying the same thing, that they are quite struck by the length and the breadth of her reign. It's nearly 70 years. Mm-hmm. Members of Congress have been around for a long time in some cases, but none of them got their start at such a young age and has such a legacy. And I think they're all acknowledging that today, that even those who've been around here for what seems like generations, they recognize the Queen did something no one else has ever done.
An extraordinary figure. Scott McFarland for us in Washington. Scott, thank you.
And still to come, the fight over a special master. The Justice Department is appealing the appointment of an outside party to review documents found at Mar-a-Lago. What this means for the investigation into former President Trump.
Plus, a record-breaking heat wave first, now a possible hurricane. We'll have the latest on California's wild week of weather. You're streaming CBS News.